So thanks for coming along. That's me, Meyrick. Some of you may know me as Mez. It's a nickname that's followed me around since I've been a kid. And I'm the Severnside Project Officer for Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. And today we're going to talk about Gloucester Nature Park. Okay, so we're going to talk a bit about what is a nature park, what is Gloucester Nature Park, and we're going to talk about what we're trying to achieve there and perhaps how we go forward into the future. So first of all, what is a nature park? I mean, really, there's no statutory definition of what a nature park is. I could call my back garden a nature park if I want to. So it's just an area of land, really, often on an urban fringe. And certainly Gloucester Nature Park, it's managed for biodiversity, landscape access, and perhaps quite unusually climate resilience as well. So those are the four sort of objectives really of this nature park. Okay, so why do we have one? Why are we bothering? I think hopefully I'll get over in this talk that these sort of spaces need advocates. They need people to look after them, support them. Robinswood Hill, where we sit now, is actually owned by Gloucester Council. Has a team of rangers, probably not enough, but they look after it. The natural landscapes, the Cotswold A&B people, they have a whole load of people who effectively are very strong advocates for the Cotswold A&B. That's an area of outstanding natural beauty. Got national parks. National parks have statutory powers. They have a whole load of staff who work with landowners and farmers to manage the land and help it sort of like for access and biodiversity landscape. Urban parks out in Gloucester, they have local authorities that look after them. They have teams of people who manage them. Urban fringes don't often have anybody, but yet they're really important spaces, and often they have some quite unique and often quite difficult problems. Okay, so Gloucester Nature Park. So here we are. It's quite an old map, but really we've got Gloucester here, and here we have basically the old floodplain of the River Severn, so it's not developed. The actual old historic centre of Gloucester, the cross is there, so as you can see, literally just a few hundred metres from this open space on its doorstep. You've got the Victorian area of Gloucester on this end. You can see very little open space, quite densely packed urban fabric, and here we've got the docks, which is increasingly sort of like a place where people come to live. And again, quite urban, dense fabric. A lot of people, not much open space, not many gardens. And you've got this on its doorstep. Importantly for this project, it has three principal landowners. So you've got City Council, who own Orley Island. Many of you may know Orley Island. It's a nature reserve on the doorstep. Floodplain. You've got Enavert, that's the old Hempstead tip, Hempstead landfill, call it what you will. It used to be owned by the County Council. It's now owned by a company called Enavert. You've got some private land down here, and then you've got more City Council land, and then on the south, you've got Severn Trent. So the important thing is that you've got these three sort of large institutional landowners, if you will, and they're not really that interested in perhaps a farmer who will need to make every last penny out of his land through, you know, agriculture, so they have more wider interests at stake. Okay, so a sub-regional context. So Cheltenham, Gloucester, and you've got the River Severn coming down here past Appley. The river splits around about here, creates Orley Island, and then it rejoins here at the parting, and then that's Hempstead landfill there, and it flows down and round and into the estuary there. So you can see quite close to an awful lot of people. Okay, so why are Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, why am I doing this? And I think really the underlying principle is that I think we believe that access to wild space, to wildlife, is fundamental to all our well-being. So I guess everyone in this room understands that, but it's not often clear to a lot of people. I think COVID brought home how important local wild space can be, how important it was and is to our overall well-being. So we want to try and promote it. Right, I'm going to go off piste a bit now. So this access to wild space is not like it is everywhere. If we're in Scandinavia, there wouldn't be an issue. We could walk where we wanted to. And we could go and, over a farmer's field, as long as we didn't damage it, that's not an issue. In England, and generally in the UK, well, not so much, certainly in England and Wales, that's not the case. And we have to blame this guy for that. So this is William I, William the Conqueror. So when he came over, 1066, we all know that date. Essentially, at that time, most of England and Wales was commons. So there was no restriction as to where you could go, what you could do, and you would forage in woodland, you would farm land, you would have commoners' rights to harvest wood. It varied from place to place, from parish to parish, with often sort of unwritten rules as to what you could and couldn't do, so that resources weren't overexploited. When William came over, he effectively conquered it, nationalised the land, and gave a load of it to his barons. And they started enclosing land. So effectively, people who had previously had access to those areas could no longer do so. This carried on for a long, long while after William the Conqueror. And there were there were revolts against this. There was a peasants' revolt. There was the Civil War, the 17th century. So you had people like John Milborne, the levellers, the diggers. The levellers all about levelling enclosures. It wasn't about levelling up. It's all about levelling enclosures. Diggers wanted land to grow stuff on because they'd been kept off the land by, increasingly aggressive landowners. And this carried forward into the 18th century, where the main vehicle for enclosures were the Parliamentary Enclosure Acts, and lots of land was enclosed and people were kicked off. And that actually helped fuel the Industrial Revolution, because people had nothing, they had to go to cities and towns for work, really. And so, fed into the Industrial Revolution. Finally, there was a bit of a kickback against the enclosures. The Commons Preservation Society, now the Open Spaces Society, set up by Octavia Hill, famous for National Trust. And they campaigned to stop some of these enclosures happening. And we had some high-profile wins, like Wimbledon Common is now open like a big park, basically because of the good people of the Open Spaces Society campaigning to make sure it's kept open. I think they wanted to quarry it. Closer to home, you got the Malverns. Again, people wanted to quarry it, and campaign stopped it, and it became it is now maintained as a common, and we can all go out there and enjoy it. I think the important thing now, it's not about access for forage or for grazing, it's about recreational access. So this became the main driver for people in the Open Space Society and others to try and protect these spaces of people. At the same time, I suppose, urban planning was getting going. People started creating parks. Preston, Birkenhead, Derby, all famous. They all say they're the first urban park. But they're there to provide a bit of green space for people and actually to uplift land values as well. And the National Trust was set up in 1895, and to preserve nature, beauty and history, because they thought they were for everyone. Okay, closer to home. So this, I think, is a fascinating story. So Leckhampton Hill, I guess you know Leckhampton Hill, just along from Crickle Hill, which is one of our sites. It was a common, it was quarried, but most of it was common. People had access to it. They used to walk to school. They used to have markets on there. They used to go for, the good ladies of the Cheltenham Ladies College would perambulate on Sunday. But in 1902, a guy called Dale bought it and literally put a fence around it and closed it. And there were two big riots, 2,000 people. So, at the time, that was a lot of people. From, a good proportion of Cheltenham people came out and rioted to demand access to their hill again. And the rioters, the ringleaders were called the Stalwarts, and they actually twice tore down the tramway cottage. So Dale, the owner, built this tramway cottage and installed a bloke there really to keep an eye on the hill for him. And the rioters tore it down. Rather ironically, that house is now where the Borough Council Ranger lives. But it got torn down twice he rebuilt it. On the second riots, the rioters were arrested, and about 5 of them were sent hard labour for 20 years or something. There's a national campaign for their release, and they finally were released. But Dale, the owner, he effectively won the day, but thankfully in 1929 he sold up, and then Cheltenham Town Council, which became the Borough Council, bought it, and again you can actually walk across Leckhampton Hill. Moving forward, we had the Kinder Scout mass trespass of 1932, which is quite a famous event, and the more recently, well, national parks legislation in the 60s, and most recently, well, it's actually 2000, the Countryside Rights of Way Act, which started to sort of push back and open up new spaces to public access. Okay, so where are we now? Mixed bag. We've got national parks, country parks. We sit in one. You can go wandering around Robinswood Hill. There's no restrictions there. Public footpaths, actually, I think it's quite good, but they're not everywhere. We're quite well furnished in some parts of Gloucestershire. The Cotswolds is pretty good, only because of people like Natural Landscapes who run projects which make sure those public rights of way are kept open and free. Some people are actually struggle with maps, with footpaths, and not very comfortable in sort of like accessing the countryside and might need a bit of hand holding. And yeah, sorry, I mentioned this before. Yeah, COVID really, I think, brought home as to how important these spaces are to us all. Right, I'm going to go off on a little tangent. So I'm a town planner. That's my profession. I worked for Gloucester Council for almost 30 years. And town planning has had its role in ensuring open space, wild space for people. Probably started off with people like Ebenezer Howard, who I'm sure you all heard of, famous town planner. And he sort of started the Garden City movement, which was, very clear that people should have access to that open space on their doorstep because it was fundamental to their well-being. Greenbelt is in the public eye at the moment. That's why I really sort of put this slide up. So Abercrombie, who some people think is like the godfather of modern town planning, really, he wrote the 1942 London plan. She had a war going on, but still had time to do a London plan. And he invented the Greenbelt. And this is his plan. And you've got the central London here, you've got the outer suburbs or outer satellite towns, and in between the two, you've got this thing he called Greenbelt. And what sadly seems to have lost, and has actually lost in legislation, is that the Greenbelt, this is to provide primarily for the recreation of Londoners. So Greenbelt is not all about, not developing this and protecting that green space. It's all about providing somewhere for people to go. Now, I would argue the Greenbelt in Gloucestershire does not really fulfil that function. There's an airport, arable farmland. It's not somewhere where I personally would go to, go for a Sunday walk. It's not that pleasant. And already mentioned, things like National Parks Acts and the 1968 Countryside Act, which provided the creation of country parks. Right, okay, that's all with the history and all the rest of it. So just to recap, this is the area. This is an isometric isometric photograph of the area. North is actually down here. South is that way. And here's a river flowing its way down, and that's the western parting. This is the eastern parting, which comes past the docks. The river rejoins at the parting, flows round Hempstead Landfill and off to the estuary. That's Severn Trent Sewage Works, Hempstead Landfill, Olney Island. So what we're going to do there? Well, this is something I had done some time ago, a bit out of date, but the aspirations are still there. Not all of this will happen. Hopefully some of it will. Key things, sort of, increased access and better, not access, increased accessibility. And increased wetland on Olney Island. Proposals for a nice big 36 hectare woodland on Hempstead Landfill. Solar farms, more wetland down at Severn Trent. Would love to get the Barnhouse Centre as a functioning visitor centre, which is meant to be its main purpose. So lots of plans, lots of proposals. In particular, Hempstead Landfill. I focus on this because it's a big blank sheet. It's now complete, it's capped, it doesn't take waste. You can still go to the household recycling centre in the middle, but the waste doesn't go there, it gets shipped off. It still takes in wood waste, so if you've got a green bin or brown bin, depending on which local authority picks up your garden waste, it'll end up here, gets chipped and made into a massive big compost heap. See how big that is? And there's still got there's a gas power plant in there and leachate plant, so still some infrastructure in there which will remain. But other than that, this is an old photograph, that's all been covered in now. So a 200 hectare site which is just covered in ryegrass. So really quite a really interesting site with loads and loads of potential. Okay, these are the four main principles, just to recap, four main principles of the Gloucester Nature Park. So biodiversity, landscape access and climate resilience. So I'm going to talk through these four components and go into a bit more detail of them. Okay, so habitat improvement and biodiversity. So we're really talking about woodland creation and management, establishment of some new wetland, hopefully some wood pasture, and actually quite importantly is actually diversion. So part of the objective is to get people to use these areas here rather than perhaps more precious areas elsewhere. A bit more detail. So this is a couple of years ago on end of a landfill site. As you can see, it's a pretty uninspiring habitat at the moment. It's just ryegrass. That's me planting some trees with some local school kids. For it to really kick off big time, we're just sort of like, I'd say playing around, but we're just dipping our toe here. 36 hectares is an awful lot. That's not going to get planted by school children. We should hopefully get a big fat, it's called the English Woodland Creation Offer, which is basically the Forestry Commission's woodland creation grant. So Enniver will get a shed load of money to plant this woodland out. So at 10k a hectare, that's almost, well, over £250,000 go to creating woodland on Hempstead landfill. So, and that will largely be done by contractors, but hopefully we'll always have some sort of community component to it as well, which involves school children, perhaps some apprentices. So quite an exciting project. It's been put on hold a little bit because they are still restoring the landfill. If you've been past it of late, you'll see these great big mounds of stuff. It almost looks like China clay country. Great big piles of clay, and they're using those to provide a deeper cap on the landfill, just to make sure there's a massive big thick chunk between what we're going to plant on top and that rubbish that's in the landfill. So woodland management, there's quite a few plantation woodlands around the whole area. So Severn Trent Sewage Works is surrounded by woodland planted there really to screen the site. Often not the most appropriate species, often densely planted, or always densely planted and never thinned. This is a little woodland created on, well, next door to the landfill site as a screen. So you can see lots of Lelandine thuja and other probably inappropriate species. So there's a team of volunteers who are out there in the autumn, basically sort of like ring barking some of the conifers, the inappropriate species. If you ring bark them, it kills them, and then provides standing dead wood, so good habitat. There's no public access in that woodland, so there's no issue about things falling over on people. So that's the sort of thing we do. And I was out on a woodland by Severn Trent at the weekend, and it's they're all planted at one point in time, so it's all the same age structure. There's heavy deer presence, so there's nothing new coming through. So I was there on Sunday just planting some trees, with some volunteers, just to give a structure, an age structure to the woodland. Okay, wood pasture. So hopefully on Hempstead landfill, it's not all woodland. We'll create some wood pasture. So this is basically grazing with trees. I love it. It's my favourite habitat, favourite landscape. I think that's Mockers Park. If you ever get the chance to go there, do it. It's on the Herefordshire Welsh border. It's absolutely fantastic. I think it's attractive. Think of William Kent, Capability Brown landscape movement. Trees, sheep, cows, and this allows me to quote my favourite saying, which is beauty's corners to dwell, where use is exiled, which is a William Kent saying, which is all about how a landscape needs to be functioning to be attractive. Okay, we're going to create some wetland, and hopefully in 2 weeks' time we're going to have some contractors out doing some wetland creation. So the areas around the perimeter of the landfill, they're at grade, they haven't been filled, but they're owned by Innovert, and we can sort of like create, you know, that sort of habitat there. That's actually on Orkney Island. We did that when I was at the City Council. It's a scrape. Literally, all we did was just bulldoze a load of soil, topsoil, a bit of subsoil away, and it just creates this depression where water hangs, and you can see you get a greater diversity of species there. Severn Trent, they own a few fields and other sites which could have some wetland creation on there as well. And there's, you know, other areas where you could just create ponds and things. So there is quite a lot of scope for wetland creation. It is a floodplain landscape after all. So yeah, I talked about diversion. So this is Orkney Island. They're the Gloucester cows which graze it. It's just quite a resilient site, quite robust. So part of the idea is almost like provide a honeypot, classic country park type thinking. This is why Robinswood Hill was created, create this honeypot thing. So people go there rather than perhaps some more precious habitats which really does not want dogs walking around scaring sort of like wading birds and stuff. So that's part of the reason that we're doing this. Right, so access, again, fundamental part of what we do. Try and improve rights of way, make them clear so people can walk them. Create permissive rights of way. This is where there's no right of way, but you create a new one. I do guided walks. I've got a leaflet, you know, promoting walks around the area. And I try and create vantage points. So that's why I got a picture of a guy surfing the board, because if you're in the area, it's really quite hard to see the river because the willow and other scrub has just grown up on the river bank, and you can't actually see the river. So you've got this, you know, the longest river in the country, and you can be, you know, right next to it and you can't see it. So I have created little viewing areas which allow people to see the river, and also have a flood management component as well. So a bit more detail on that. Nope. So guided walks, I know a couple of you in the audience have been on some of these, so this is just people, the general public, just turning up, and I take them round and talk about the area. I do professional bodies, so I'm a town planner. I've had loads of town planners out there looking at what I'm doing. And, you know, target particular groups, so I've had people from particular businesses who have had an interest, and I've taken them, shown them around the area, talked about it. So this is actually some work we did quite early on. That's a Severn Way. You couldn't walk that in summer because it was up here in all sorts. So that's the two guys who ran, I don't know if they still do, the community payback team. It's a probation service basically. And they cleared it for us and made it accessible. The environment agency stepped up and done a bit of work as well. Replace stiles. Stiles are often difficult for certain people to get over, so we replaced them with kissing gates. And some sites are just really, really boggy, so we've done things where we just raise them up a bit, just to get them out of the water so we can walk them when it's wet. And as mentioned, created some permissive paths as well. And that's just a group of volunteers putting in a kissing gate. Okay, I've got Sustrans. Sustrans, they're the sustainable transport charity, promote cycling and active travel. They did a study of the area. One of the things they pointed out, in fact I knew this anyway and I've been promoting it for a while, is to create a new cycle path through the area. So this is Severn Trent work. This is Ree Lane, which runs lovely. You wouldn't think you were just a stone's throw from Gloucester. It's a dead end. But there's a footpath which connects it from here down Sims Lane, and now there you're back onto the highway, and actually that's the Route 42, which is the Sustrans strategic cycle network. So I thought quite simple just to make that into a permissive bridle path. That means cyclists could use it. So cyclists could do a circular route, you know, so kids could cycle from Hempstead all the way around, from Posmead, and not have to worry about going on the road. You could do another route out of Gloucester without having to go on a busy road. Severn Trent, bless them, they never objected to this proposal. They always said they support it in principle. Well, my contact said he supported it in principle, and we finally got the report saying yes, let's do it. He said, oh, don't know about that. So he's worried that if that becomes a bridleway, it becomes a cycle path. If the works need to expand, then he's going to have to shift it. Well, that's not really an argument because it would be permissive bridleway, so we could just close it tomorrow, and he's going to have to shift the footpath anyway because it's a statutory footpath. But anyway, whatever. So currently that project is on hold, which is frustrating because that would have been a very easy win. Okay, I'm very excited about this. This is a Brunel Bridge. So if you know the college down in town, as you go down the southwestern bypass, you've got the college on your right, big blue building. On the left, you've got Olney Island. And just by the big traffic light junction, you got that. And that's the Brunel Bridge. And back in the early narratives, the county council were going to remove it to increase flood flow as compensation for the southwest bypass. The southwestern bypass went in, I think, 2006, I think. They wanted to take this out as flood compensation. And actually, you know, I went down there to have I worked for the city council at the time. And I went down to have a look and thought, this looks quite an interesting bridge. So I got the city council's historic buildings officer down, and he did a bit of research and identified it as a Brunel Bridge. So it's a Brunel Swing Bridge. So I used to take trains from the main line over into the docks. So thankfully the city council listed it, so the county council couldn't demolish it. So thankfully it's still there, and it would make a beautiful little cycle path, pedestrian footpath over onto Olney Island. But potentially it could cost millions. We don't know yet. I'm still waiting for a condition survey from the county council. Okay, so the other component is landscape. A bit hard to put your finger on. Some people don't like all this. I'm not too bothered. Sometimes it can sort of like provide a rhythm to a landscape. It can thread the eye through a difficult landscape. I know one of my old bosses at the city council wanted to bury all this. It would cost absolute millions, utterly bonkers, but whatever. That's probably more what we're interested in. That's just a photograph from the cycle path as it goes over Olney Island. But there's I mean, like, you know, those are planted by Aquila Networks, because there's a substation here. I planted those almost 30 years ago now, but we maintain that vista through to Highland Church, which is that classic punctuation point in the landscape. So you can actually have an impact on landscapes. You need to think about it. Actually, these trees here in the middle will probably get rid of for a number of reasons, but one of them will be to make sure that landscape feature is maintained. Apologies for this, the quality of this slide, but on Hempstead Landfill, this was a very sort of like basic drawing that Enever came up with for their, you know, what they wanted the site to look like. I scribbled over it and put in a few little subtle changes to it, and just trying to like protect views to Windmill Hill, Highland Church. I'm annoyed, you know, that shouldn't be there. That's right on top of the landfill. It shouldn't be there. It should be further over here where it's less visible. So on there's things we can do to make the landscape better. We've just got to tender at the moment to get a landscape architect to do a proper landscape plan of what we want to achieve on Hempstead, rather than this rather bish-bosh, literally back of the fag packet sort of drawing that we have now. So hopefully by the summer we'll have a proper landscape architect's plan of how that site will roll out, and I know whoever gets it will take into account the macro landscape impacts of what will go on there. Okay, climate resilience. The area is really quite important for climate resilience, in particular flood management, low carbon energy production, the reduction of the urban heat island effect, and low carbon food. So in terms of flood management. So flood management for Gloucester and the River Severn is all about getting water from here into the estuary as quickly as possible. It's all about getting it past. So at peak spate, 40,000 cubic metres a second of water go past Gloucester, which is just, I can't work out what that is, what that looks like. It's just a phenomenal amount of water surges past Gloucester. You know, in the 2007 floods, people talk, why can't you pump it around? Why can't you build a relief channel? 40,000 cubic metres a second, it's just bonkers. So what you need to do is actually try and reduce impediments to flood flow, which is why the County Council wanted to take out that bridge, because it's an impediment to flood flow. So the floodplain of Gloucester, or this part of Gloucester, used to be from about here to just the bottom of the Scarpa Hempstead. And then some bright spark in the 60s thought they'd put a big landfill site there. So flood flow across here is significantly constrained by the landfill. You've got Orley Island, really important flood flow. When I worked at the City Council, when the cuts came, they wanted to effectively abandon Orley Island. The question was asked, why are we putting cows on Orley Island? Why can't we just get rid of them? They're expensive. And my point was, well, if you took the cows off Orley Island, Gloucester floods, because the cows basically keep the scrub down, keep the trees down, and allow that clear flow of water across, which stops water from displacing over into Gloucester. So flood flow is really important, and just taking some of the trees out along here will improve that flood flow through and help improve flood management in Gloucester. I would dearly love to take as a low level embankment here, agricultural flood embankment here, which protects these fields from a 1 in 10 event. Utterly useless, but in a big flood you can see, I mean, I had the pleasure of, I managed to blag a flight over this area and up towards Tewkesbury in the 2014 floods, and took some brilliant photographs, and you see the water just surging down here, and it's cascading over these flood embankments, so the water is impounding behind it, and it kind of pours along here and discharges back into the Severn over here. Really, really interesting. But of course this great big, we're never going to get rid of that. That's there forever. So anything we can do to increase that flood flow through will be a benefit. So solar energy, I was involved with this when I worked at City Council, started the debate off. Yes, but that's actually complete now. And yeah, so about a hectare giving 2 megawatts peak output. As a part of the plan application, there's a requirement for biodiversity net gain, so the biodiversity value of that site would be at least 10% better than it was before. And that's just where it sits. Originally it was meant to go into Hydro, which is a big factory here, so meant to be a private line, private wire, which would have been very, very lucrative. But Hydro moved out of Britain really. So that never happened, so now it goes into the grid. So, yeah, biomass and landfill gas. So, as I mentioned, your green waste from your household probably comes here. It's shredded, chipped, and then put into these great big windrows, and over a matter of weeks, it composts down into that sort of stuff, which currently they spread over the landfill site. They sieve it, and you get a lot of woody material, which they can't get rid of. And actually they end up landfilling it. So it's a double bad whammy, because not only are you losing a potentially sort of good source of fuel, you're sticking it in a landfill where it's going to rot down and put methane up into the atmosphere. So not good. So we got a consultants who were looking at how we could use the waste from this really to actually generate waste, to generate electricity. It didn't go quite as I planned. I rather hoped you could burn it, but you can't because it's got too much plastic in it, because people insist on putting plastic in their green waste. So if you put plastic in the green waste, stop. Don't put the plastic bag in the bin, just put it straight in the bin. So it has a high plastic contamination rate, so you can't just burn it, because when you compost it all down, you're left with the woody stuff and the plastic. So the proposal was to put it into a pyrolysis plant that effectively heats it up. It gives off what's called a syngas, which I thought you could hopefully burn to make energy. But what the process that these the consultants were advocating was that syngas then is used to reheat more waste. So really the process fuels itself. It doesn't need any energy to actually produce it, but you don't get any spare gas at the end of it. But what we do get is biochar, which is just a lump of carbon basically, which will last forever. So you're taking carbon out of the atmosphere and leaving it forever. It doesn't biodegrade, well, over a very long time. And you can get carbon credits and you can actually sell biochar as a fertilizer. So there may be a commercial outlet for that, but we don't know yet. And as a side, there's already sort of like, if you ever go over Hempstead landfill, you see lots of pipes sticking out of it, and literally they drill holes into it, pump out the gas, stick it into a really great big lorry engine that turns around, drives a generator, which produces electricity. Okay, the urban heat island effect, I guess you're familiar with what this is. So trees, wetland, any natural vegetation will actually reduce temperatures in urban areas by quite a lot. And you see this is from Castlemead, so there's the city, there's Castlemead, it's right next door. So if you're an office worker and you want to cool off, you can go for a walk there. It will reduce the temperature in the city itself, it will. Years ago I went to Munich when I was a town planning student. In Munich there was this massive wedge of green open area which goes right into the city centre. And that's because in summer, they have quite warm summers, they have like a Chinook effect from the Alps, which drives a cool wind down from the Alps into Munich, and this big funnel basically is left open so that wind drifts through the city and cools it in summer. That is real town planning, you know. I can't imagine that ever happening over here, but that I was well impressed. So yeah, that urban cooling effect is really quite important, and certainly yes, workers, residents can go for a walk and cool down on a hot day. And yeah, as the planet warms, then those sorts of functions are even more important. Okay, low carbon food production. I'd rather hope that with all the compost, the water, the energy on site, we could get something going like that. These do occur. There's a big one in Worcester, next door to a big landfill site. They use the landfill gas to burn it, generate electricity. That provides electricity to light the greenhouses in the winter. You get the heat to heat the greenhouses in the winter, and actually get carbon dioxide from the burning methane to pump into the greenhouse to make the tomatoes grow. Brilliant, but you need a site of about 5, 6, 7 hectares of flat, dry land. Hempstead is surrounded by either industrial areas, housing, or floodplain, so that can't happen. But there may be a scope for a community growing project, and we're looking into that at the moment. Okay, funding, so always critical. Currently, sort of like, well, initially it's funded by Severn Trent, just for some feasibility work. It's now in receipt of UK shared prosperity funding, or levelling up to you and I, and Enova. So I get paid 1 day a week from them, 1 day a week from them, and capital works funded by various sources. Long term, hopefully things like biodiversity net gain, habitat regulatory assessment, suitable alternative natural green space, all these sorts of planning stroke development funding streams may be able to help fund a project into the future. But ultimately, you need someone to take it forward. If there's no person running it, it doesn't happen. Okay, before going on, I just want to talk briefly about Regional Park. So this has been an idea for donkey's years. I got that drawn up when I worked for the City Council. It was part of a bid for, it was called the Lottery Fund Landscape Partnership bid. I really sort of got the idea for regional parks when I was on I was in a field trip to Eastern Germany about 5 years after the wall came down, so mid-90s, and the East was just swarming with technocrats from the West. All the legislation literally was transferred overnight, and some of the guys I met were just designating regional parks like they're going out of fashion, and literally they were just a red line around a map, and then within it, it was activity. It was a focus for activity, not just landscape and biodiversity, but more often than not about economic regeneration, trying to get these areas some sort of like tourism benefit. And yeah, I think that has a potential for this area. Currently the Lee Valley is probably the only proper regional park we have, but there are others. This thing in Gloucestershire, there's limited political support for it, but it did make it. Just before COVID, there was all the great and good met to talk about the future of Gloucestershire, and actually they had a regional park for the Severn Vale or Gloucester Vale as one of its 5 big projects it wanted to take forward. So who knows, it might happen. And that's just another iteration that was done by a student who did some work on a regional park. And that was her potential boundary. Okay, to conclude. So hopefully I made the case for the fact that accessible, semi-natural areas, wild space on urban fringes needs an advocate, a bit like country parks, national landscapes, national parks and regional parks. If they're going to succeed, they're going to need somebody, not necessarily me, but somebody to promote them. There are wider benefits around things like climate resilience, landscape, etc. With current funding, so I'm hopefully be around for another year or so. Looking forward, as I mentioned, these development type funding or things like agri-environments and stuff will come forward and may be able to keep the project ticking over into the future. So hopefully it's looking bright. Right, that's me done. Any questions?